and welcome to everybody that is joining us here today, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live, I believe, as part of the TUC Fringe events. Thank you for joining this panel event today on garment workers still paying the price for the pandemic. My name is Ruth Osier. I work at War and Want as Head of International Programmes, and I will be chairing today's event. This event is being recorded so that it can be viewed later on by people who can't join us right now. War and Want was founded and came out of the labour movement and has been very much rooted within the labour movement ever since, and works on issues of poverty, inequality and injustice. We're a workers' rights organisation supporting trade unions and workers' organisations both here in the UK and globally, and some we will be hearing from today. We've got a great panel of speakers. Please may I ask people who are joining us, if you have questions on Zoom, there is a Q&A function, so you can put your question in there, and if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put your questions in the comments. We will try our best to answer questions and in the spaces between our speakers. Today, as we meet today, we can see that we're in the midst of multiple crises: a crisis of economic inequality, a climate crisis, and now the COVID crisis as well, each one compounding the other. And each is exposing those structural injustices that have shaped our economic system and that deny working people the right to live with dignity. In the last year, the world's richest billionaires have seen their wealth jump by some sort of staggering trillions, $4 trillion. And at the same time, we've seen working people lose about the same amount in wage cuts. We've seen millions of lives and livelihoods that have been lost already to the climate crisis, and amongst those that are most impacted are the poor, a place in the global south that have actually contributed the least to this crisis. Then we have also now seen this COVID crisis, which has claimed the lives of around sort of 4.5 million lives, and many more that are living with lifelong health issues as a result. And yet governments, including our own, are still putting profit ahead of a people's vaccine. And this means that there are more people now vaccinated in the UK than across the whole of the continent of Africa, which is just shocking. And even today, as the WTO are meeting in Geneva, that whole claim around no one is safe until we're all safe rings very hollow as a result. And the reality of that decision is that in August in Bangladesh, there was a 20% positive rate of the largest single number of deaths in a day, and Sri Lanka has faced a doubling of the infection rates and death rates. But despite this, garment workers in both countries have been designated as essential workers, and therefore they've been excluded from a number of lockdown measures, and this is forcing them to work in crowded factories without the measures that trade unions have been calling for over a year to protect them. This is also linked in and part of the economic crisis that is pushing millions of workers into poverty, and the hard-won labour rights that have we've gained. We're seeing a pushback and a rollback on those, and as the sort of richest countries have been able to hand over trillions into big business in the name of recovery, we're seeing a lot of working people who have been left, including garment workers, to pretty much fend for themselves. No sector tells this story about a broken economic and political system really more powerfully than the garment sector. The globalized fashion industry is known for that: the long hours, the poverty pay, the unsafe working conditions for millions of men and women who are making clothes for powerful companies that we see in our UK high streets. This is not new. War and Want and unions have campaigned for a very long time around injustices in the global garment industry. And, as COVID hit last year, we saw the factory gates closing and garment workers literally really left destitute as fashion companies then sort of began cancelling or delaying orders. And the knock-on effect on that was immediate for millions of workers who lost wages, lost jobs without compensation. And it's estimated that across South and Southeast Asia, garment workers are owed between 3.2 and up to maybe $5.8 billion in unpaid wages and legally owed compensation just for those first 3 months. Now, wage theft and unfair dismissal, union busting, they're all still rife today, alongside, as I said, now the surging rates of COVID in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. And at the heart of this, we see fashion companies and those pricing and production policies that are driving profits ahead of people and planet. So today, as our high street clothing shops are open, the ready-made garment industry is key to the economies of Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. But we have to ask, what does this actually mean for the lives, the livelihoods and rights of garment workers? I'm delighted to be joined by a great panel today. We're going to hear first from Anton, the Joint Secretary of the Free Trade Zones and General Services Union in Sri Lanka, which is one of the largest and oldest unions representing garment workers in Sri Lanka. They're also an affiliate of Industrial and take part in the ILO Decent Work Task Team, and also one of War on Want's long-standing partners. Now, Anton has to attend another important meeting on behalf of his members today, so we're going to ask Anton to talk first, and any questions we will try to put to Anton before we move to our other panelists, Tanzania Hoskins and Ricardo Latorre. So Anton, please could you share with us now how garment workers in Sri Lanka have been and still are paying the price for the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and I can give some. I can share some experiences because of the situation in the COVID-19. As you know, the COVID-19 impacted basically the factories where they completely based on global supply chain. The apparel sector is one of the sectors in Sri Lanka has been impacted. So, for instance, at the beginning of 2020, there was 500,000 employees in the apparel sector in Sri Lanka. But now that number of employees have been reduced to 350,000. So we can say that you can see that 150,000 workers have been missing. Because why I am saying they're missing? Because they have not been terminated formally. They have not been given any compensation by the employers. What they did is they stopped giving their facilities, for instance, the transport facilities, and they have stopped giving their attendant bonus, even the breakfast and all these things, and then overtime and incentive payment. So workers, they have stopped coming to work because there's no point to come to work, because that is how they were managing, because the basic salary is not sufficient. So from other earnings, they were managing. When the company stopped providing transport, how can female worker report for work early morning? So finally, because of the first pandemic wave in 2020, lot of workers lost their employment, but no worker has got any compensation. So the employers, the suppliers were able to reduce their workforce without giving any compensation. They use various methods to create the situation where workers to decide not to report for work. Now the situation is, now the suppliers are saying that now the whole world has been open, because at the first wave, the whole world were closed, and even the big shops in the Europe and America was closed. And now they say that all the shops are open in Europe and America. Now the European and American people have money because they have not to spend money because they were locked down. They are not now giving traveling and anything. Therefore, now the European and American people are now wanted to buy things by, garments and other things. Therefore, now they are asking workers to work more and more. Now what they are doing is they have called all the workers to work, because now they have a less number of employees, but they are getting the same production targets. And the Sri Lanka, although the health authorities have to give the guidelines for health guidelines, but according to the health guidelines, still we have the old guidelines, because now we got Delta virus. So the guidelines has to be amended, but it has not been amended. For instance, according to the health authorities, because of the Delta virus, there should be a 2-meter distance, but there's nothing, even 1 meter distance cannot be maintained, because the workers has to work, and the less workers have to do the more production. The other thing is, because of the factories are air conditioned, the health authorities are asking you should not work under the air condition, but air condition, the employers do not, they keep the air condition because they want to maintain the quality of the fabrics. And therefore, the air condition is inside the factories, and then the dust are inside the factories. Workers are inhaling all the dust. So COVID-19 is a very serious issue on their lungs. So they get a very serious thing. And now most of the factories, the workers are getting, tested positive, and many workers have been quarantined. And now, not unlike earlier, now even the first contact people have not been asked them to quarantine, because they don't want to see that they will get the less workers to, otherwise they can't continue the production target. So the apparel factories have become a spreading center of the COVID-19, and therefore everywhere now workers can't, they are complaining that they can't work. But the government, when they declared a curfew from 20th August, and it is going to up to 14th September, the government declared the workers has to work, because these workers, these industries have been essential. So even though they declared a curfew in order to control the spreading of the virus, but these workers has to work, because and they don't get any extra payment or anything, any extra protection. So as a result of this, many factory workers even now, so either they at home or at the boarding house, because they are quarantined. And now government saying that the only solution is to give the vaccine. But we can see that they have given the vaccine, but what we can see that after they give the vaccine, they are going to tell the workers that you have got the vaccine, even other measures, health measures are not there. Don't worry, you have to work because you are not going to die. So already 5 employees have died, but they have not get any compensation. So the situation is so serious, and the government know that situation. With this situation, our union was raising these issues with the authorities, with the government, but they are not willing to, hear these voices, because the workers have not really organized. Very few workers have been organized. So now the government has declared an emergency and the essential service. So we know that they are going to use this against the union. With all this, because of our intervention, we were able to get more and more new trade union branches. We got 7 new branch unions, and their workers are producing for various brands, including Next. We were able to organize them, and now we have a trade union there. So, but even though we organize, still the companies are trying to bust the unions. Because of the curfew, Labor Department has been closed. So they know that there will be no pressure for them to address those issues, because the government, the Labor Department are not functioning. So they do whatever things they want. The only solution we are having is to bring the pressure from to the brands through the civil society organization like War on Want. So we are continuing our campaigns. We are continuing campaign to protect the workers from the pandemic. We are continuing our campaign to ensure the workers' job employment, job security. And at the same time, we are continuing our campaign to ensure their income. So these are the activities we are carried out with all the difficulties.
Thank you, Anton. And I know that your union, right at the beginning of the sort of the outbreak of COVID last year, your union and others were putting forward very clear and concrete proposals about how workers' health and safety could be protected, which was around involving workers in that process. But as you say, almost the fear of workers organising is putting that down. Could you say a little bit about some of the measures that you're asking employers and government and brands to take notice of in order to protect workers' health?
Yeah, in fact, at the beginning of 2020, when when situation was, we who proposed the government that even the government or the employers, even the trade unions cannot face these challenges alone. So therefore, we propose that there should be a tripartite efforts to address this issue. So as a result of our intervention, the government set up a tripartite task force to handle the COVID-19. The first thing is because the government said that only 50% workers can be employed in order to maintain the distancing. The employers wanted to get rid of the other 50%. So we took up the position that because of the COVID-19, no single workers' jobs will be terminated. So we were able to push the government to, took up that position. As a result, we agreed that if the workers are not 50%, only 50% workers are coming to work, other 50% should be paid at least 50% of their wages, and the workers should be called back to work by rotation. Then at least 75% of their monthly income can be assured. So through this process, we were able to make, made various proposals to protect the workers. For instance, we proposed that there should be a COVID-19 bipartite health committees at each and every factory. In fact, there is a decision from the Labor Ministry that each and every factory there should be a bipartite health committees. At the same time, we propose that each and every boarding house has to be, cleared up with make sure that this is a healthy, sound places. So we try to, through social dialogue, we try to resolve these problems by engaging with the employers and the government. So as a result, we were achieved a lot of things, but now we found that employers do not want to continue that social dialogue system. They want to have their own way to carry out their exploitation without joining with the union.
Yeah, thank you, Anton. I mean, it's actually really good to hear that even in the midst of all of this, and maybe because of all of this anger and the treatment, that your union has been able to see workers join and form new branches. And yes, that history about that repression of trade unions continues. You were saying there about the workers' health committees and being so vital that workers are part of the processes of saying they know very well their production lines and how things work, so they're best placed to protect their own health. So and now, as I was saying, you were saying that orders must be fulfilled. It's like this is the only thing that drives forward stuff. What would you say to sort of UK unionists, workers' rights people, and UK public? What are the things that we can maybe say and do that can support garment workers in Sri Lanka at this time and your union?
I think we know that we also agree that there should be the country economy also very important, because country has to go forward. But if the government wanted to employ these workers during curfew, there should be a dialogue with the unions and dialogue with the workers, and then we can map out how to protect the workers and how to ensure their income and how to they are in the living standard. So, but without doing anything, if they are going to do that, in order to get the orders, fill the orders of the brand, I think we feel that the brands have a major responsibility to protect these workers, because the principal employer of these employees are the brands. So I think uh, the our European friends and the trade unions should pressurize the brands to ensure that the workers should be protected from pandemic, as well as ensure their income, and as well as ensure their job security. Then therefore we need to develop a kind of a solidarity between north and south in order to support these work.
That's great, Anton. Thank you very much, and very, very sort of powerful words there. I'm actually going to invite Rob Johnson from TUC to join us just briefly in this sort of kind of Q&A section, because Rob, I understand that you have some work that you're doing around the garment factories in Leicester in the UK. Maybe you'd like just to share a little bit of that with us while Anton is also with us.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, firstly, just to say to Anton, great everything you're doing, and full solidarity from the TUC in the Midlands region. And as interesting you noting there, and so much of what you were saying was ringing true to what we've been finding out in Leicester. The issues in Leicester hit the national media's attention due to the local lockdown originally put in place in Leicester during the COVID crisis. The issues taking place in the garment factories in Leicester shut down because the illegality, the criminality, the exploitation, the pressure, the outrageous nature and state of the industry in Leicester. And what's really depressing is so many people said, well, it's been going on for years. Nothing you can do about it all. It's unorganized workplaces. There's literally illegality, and there's a great deal of very, very vulnerable workers, largely female, largely Asian, in a difficult position to talk out. And I was really taken by what you said about the brands having the responsibility. And that rings true to so much what we've now been doing over the last year and want to do in terms of partnering up with brands and using their leverage to put an end to the illegality and exploitation in Leicester by calling it out, because a lot of people in these brands want to do the right thing as well, but are unsure because it's just become endemic and not sure where to turn. And we say, well, see us as a partner. See us as a partner. So Brand X, work with us, and our offer has been pre-membership. So we've got no members in there because we don't expect any members in the short term because of the nature of the workforce and how it's been. But work with us so that we'll go into those factories, build relations, and be your eyes and ears. And when we've got problems with conflict, we'll speak to you, and then you come in and you have the conversation with suppliers and fix things. Kind of like flipping it round on its head. Whilst we don't have any members, the brands could be the leverage and so forth. And it's very new. We've had lots of conversations over the last year through I know you were saying there is that the tripartite mechanism with the government. We've got this sort of voluntary agreement with the brands, enforcement agencies, and ourselves, civic organisations, trying to get some sort of protocol for how the industry can be fixed. If that comes off, that would give trade unions guaranteed access to supply chains of the brands, which would be transformative for Leicester, for the UK garment industry. And we're also aware that some of the brands who've spoken to us, if it works in Leicester and the UK, would be keen to look at that sort of internationally as well. Will we get there with everyone signing off a whole agreement? Possibly. Also fully aware that there are lots of people who don't necessarily have the interest in getting it agreed to. It might fall down. But if it falls down, the idea doesn't fall away. And that people for different interests can end up doing the right thing. So there might be some brands who realize they don't want to be seen to be doing X. So let's work with them who want to do the right thing and show facts on the ground that you can still turn your profit. These factories can still be successful. You can still, and then you can have unions in there who will give you the best advertising in the world. You can spend £1 million on lawyers and the best PR in the world.
Yeah.
We'll do that for free. We'll back
Yes.
you and say you're doing the right thing. So from that different angle, try and change the industry. And that's a massive ambition for what we've got in Leicester. People are nervous because the industry might go, don't change it too much. And we're saying, well, we want the industry to be successful and thrive and jobs. That's exactly, I'm sure you have the same issues over there, but like you, we're just trying to do it for the interests of working people. The unions on our side, we've got very low density, very little presence at the moment. They've committed to it because it's the right thing to do. As I said, there's exploitation. The horror stories are coming out are outrageous. But if we can turn it round in Leicester, we can turn it round in the sector for the UK. And I'm keen to see how actually we can learn lessons from some stuff you've got over in Sri Lanka and share this to bring these different agendas together to build that pressure and just change that culture. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. I think, it's a very important because our experience is when you have a satisfied workforce, and definitely it is a win-win situation for both employers and the employees. Because, when the workers are satisfied, automatically their productivity will be increasing, and then at the same time, the employer can get more and more orders because industrial peace is there. And how to satisfy the workforce? The workers' voice has to be heard. That can be done only through a union, because if there is a union, the workers' voice can be heard, and that will be really benefited not only the workers but even the employers. That is our experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and thanks for sharing us that, Rob. And I'm sure that after this webinar, it's good to connect, and I'm sure with Anton we'll have more conversations about linking this up, because as has come across already very clearly, like, the solidarity is very important, and actually it's workers coming together that will really make a difference. And yes, we play a role as Warren One, and we play a role as UK citizens as well. But it's really great to have heard from you, Rob. And Anton, I'm aware you may have to leave us for your other meeting, but before you go, if you did want to just say any final words at all, please feel free.
Yeah, now this situation is not only Sri Lanka. We know that even Bangladesh and Indonesia and other Asian countries, because Asia is the more than 60% of the apparel is producing in Asia. So the same situation exists in everywhere in Asia. So there is a need for develop a real solidarity between the workers and between the organization who are working with the workers, with apparel sector employees, and at the same time the trade unions of Asian level trade union should come together to face this challenge, because unless and until we organize, we don't see any future. So therefore, my request or my appeal is, let us organize, and then working together, then we are in a very strong position to face any challenges. So therefore, we request you people to continuously support the endeavor of all the Asian workers, Asian trade unions, to fight against this situation.
Thank you very much, Anton, and yes, thank you for that very good and clear reminder around the regional nature and the global nature of this. Thank you for joining us today, and best wishes for the rest of your day and your meetings. And yes, Anton reminded us, yes, it's not just Sri Lanka, it's across the region, and in fact in Bangladesh, as well as COVID, the garment workers' safety there was sort of threatened very much more immediately as well by the expiry of the 2013 Bangladesh Accord on building and fire safety. At some point that is a landmark and legally binding agreement for people that are joining us, and there looked to be this year a moment when brands would want to sort of like turn the clock back and go back to some of these more voluntary mechanisms that they could keep, you know, their own house in order type of thing. It was really the pressure that came from the global and the regional unions. It was also pressure that came through supporters of 1&1 and unions that let brands know that actually no, that is not keeping workers safe. These voluntary codes are not. Yes, with that, I would love to now introduce our next speaker and panelist. Tanzania Hoskins is a friend and comrade of 1&1 over many years. She's a well-known and freelance writer and journalist. She's written 2 books, Stitched Up, the anti-capitalist book of fashion, and more recently, Footwork, What Your Shoes Are Doing to the World. Tanzi writes regularly around the fashion industry, and recently, Tanzi, you've been writing articles, I think, as part of the RMG Collectivo, which has been looking actually about the fashion industry's response in times of COVID and the impact on workers. So hopefully maybe Tanzi, you can tell us a little bit more around, yes, as Anton has said, what is this kind of bigger and more kind of global picture that you are seeing? And it'd be great to hear from you today. Thank you.
Hi, Ruth. Can you hear me okay? I had a few tech issues at the beginning.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you. I also had a tech issue and disappeared for a moment, but we seem to be all back and present.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, so firstly, thank you so much to 1&1 for doing this meeting at the TUC and for keeping the question of the garment industry and the lives of 60 million garment workers around the world firmly on the agenda. Too often fashion gets sidelined, you know, as women's work or as like a feminine interest, which is, you know, for that reason, for sexist reasons, supposedly not worth our time and attention. And I think, yeah, so what I'm going to do, like, first of all, I am going to get really quite depressing, and I'm going to talk about what's happened during the pandemic. But then after that, I do want to talk about some of the more positive things that have happened. So we're going to get depressing, but it's not going to be all doom and gloom. So yeah, the major thing with the fashion industry is that it's clear that even without COVID-19 and the pandemic, life for garment workers has been getting worse, not better, over the last decade. And a major reason for that is that wages for garment workers have stagnated, whilst profits for brands, and you mentioned profits at the beginning, Ruth, profits have shot up into the stratosphere. And this is largely because, you know, fashion is an almost entirely unregulated, deregulated industry. And, you know, we talked a bit about Leicester, you know, and so it basically comes down to supply chain liability, you know, brands not taking proper responsibility for the people that they directly hire. And so what has happened during COVID-19 is that the impact has been absolutely horrendous. There has been the expectation, which we have seen for years and years and years, which is that the poorest people, the people who've been made most vulnerable by capitalism, will be the ones who will take the brunt of the pandemic. So, you know, brands essentially haven't been willing to give up a red cent. You know, there's been this expectation that they will keep hold of their profits while, you know, and workers can just go hang, basically. And yeah, I want to just talk a bit about what that has meant on the ground. And there's a line in a report. So the Asia Floor Wage Alliance did a report recently that was called Money Heist. And there's a line in there, and it says that workers coped during the pandemic by engaging in their own mental and physical degradation. And this is absolutely true. You know, there was nothing left. You know, people who were already completely impoverished, there were no margins for error. So they, you know, it was about the degradation of their own bodies. And another line in that report says that the pandemic saw the mining of workers' bodies. And what we're talking about here is the loss of the basics. So we're talking about the loss of food, So people's nutritional and calorie intake just going down. And and I interviewed a worker in Sri Lanka who literally ate rice with salt for weeks and weeks on end. And this has been an absolutely global pattern, that starvation and extreme hunger has taken place within the garment industry. You've had reports of women actually contemplating killing their children because they had no idea how they were going to look after them going forward, and they just they faced watching them starve to death. We've seen like extreme levels of debt in the fashion industry, so workers having to take on like debt literally from loan sharks, in countries like Pakistan. I did an interview there where people were having to pawn off like everything they owned, to give up like their housing, to move house and leave all their possessions in their house, for their landlord because they couldn't pay things back. And you mentioned Bangladesh. So as part of the RMG Collectivo work that I did, a colleague of mine, Afros, did some really good in-depth interviews with garment workers, and right across the industry you've seen this economic precarity and this fear of terminations, because there's always somebody else who will come and take your job if you don't do what the bosses will see. So we've seen like just endemic issues like so unpaid wages, people just not being paid for overtime, not being paid properly. Sexual harassment simply becomes more easy for men to do if it's like, oh, you lose your job unless you do XYZ. Sickness from work. What Afros found is include like one thing that stuck out was like women having urine infections because they weren't allowed to drink enough water, and they weren't allowed to take toilet breaks, and and things like this. Another country we covered in our research was Honduras, where you saw the termination. So COVID was basically used as an excuse to terminate sick workers. So a real issue in Honduras is repetitive strain injury, which I'm sure a lot of some people listening might have encountered. And COVID was basically used to just get rid of all the workers who had repetitive strain injury. And that kind of thing makes me so sick, because it's really easy to avoid repetitive strain injury. You just have to swap the tasks around. You don't make somebody just do the same task for like weeks and months on end at a sewing machine. And then, of course, my last depressing point is Myanmar, clearly, where the impact of COVID-19 was extremely severe. You had a big uprising in 2020 of unionists and workers. You had an extremely repressive crackdown, and this is before the generals took over. Extremely repressive crackdown that saw trade unionists locked up. I interviewed 2 women who were on a protest, and then within 24 hours they were in prison. So they were arrested, charged, tried, and jailed within 24 hours. And then, of course, you had the coup, you had the military coup, and things have escalated. And we've seen thousands of people shot dead in the streets since then. So just to balance things out again, so I don't leave everyone feeling horrendous. There are some good things that have happened in the garment industry. I mean, Anton mentioned the unionization of Next. And I think that's a really important one for us here in Britain. This is about supply chain liability for a British company. The Next actually owns that factory in Sri Lanka, so it's a just absolute direct line from Next HQ to those workers, and it was a big struggle. And Next didn't like the fact that the workers were unionizing, but they did it. And I think it'd be good to see that replicated as much as possible. Los Angeles has just had a really major breakthrough. The SB 62 bill, which aims to scrap piece rates. And instead replace that with a minimum wage. That has finally managed to leap over one of its big legal hurdles, and is now just a few steps away from becoming law. And that means that workers They did a similar thing with the construction industry a few years ago, but it means that workers will be able to go after brands specifically, and not just the subcontracted factories that are hiring them in order to get money. And that's really significant because LA is like really typical of the rest of the world. You know, it's predominantly migrant workers, predominantly women, and predominantly people who are being horrendously exploited. Yeah, the Bangladesh Accord. Stop me if I'm going. I've got 3 more points, Ruth. 3 more interesting, more optimistic points. The Bangladesh Accord was, you know, which came into effect after Rana Plaza, the factory collapse that killed 1,138 people. And this was a really groundbreaking bit of global legislation, which held brands accountable for the factories that they were producing their clothes in, factories that were literally death traps and that we had seen collapse and set on fire over and over again. And this one bit, you know, this one thing that the trade union movement globally had managed to achieve, the Bangladesh Accord, was due to expire on August the 31st. And after a big, you know, global push, we now have a new piece of legislation which, you know, which need to keep a firm eye on, but it's called the International Accord for Health and Safety in the Textile and Garment Industry, and hopefully we might see them more countries adopt that model as well. And then, yeah, just 2 more things that I think are like I wanted to mention is that at New York Fashion Week, there's been some protests by End Forced Labor in fashion, highlighting the China and China's exploitation and slavery regime regarding the Uyghurs in the cotton industry. And I think that's, you know, that's a growing issue for the fashion industry, but it's good to see people actually taking to the streets and standing up for people. And similarly, another group of workers within the fashion industry who we don't talk about that much are the fashion models. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the Model Alliance in New York, who are, you know, working incredibly hard and pushing forward with their Respect program, which is aiming to end sexual violence in the modeling industry. You know, an issue which is absolutely, I mean, there'd be no modeling industry currently without the sexual exploitation of young women, you know, women who generally start working like before the age of 16. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that there are these, you know, these pockets of resistance, and wherever you get exploitation, you get resistance. It's bleak, but it's not all doom and gloom.
No, that's great. Thank you, Tanzi. And I think I was struck actually just on some of the last points you were making, the importance actually of recognizing where we can join and not being confined just to our little corners, like, well, I'm in this particular, you know, I'm in this union, or I'm in a civil society group, or I'm, you know, a designer, or but actually there's strength which comes from recognizing that, you know, together is stronger, and I'm finding ways where there isn't judgment in how we approach these issues, that we actually bring on board, you know, everyone from buying clothes through, you know, workers as well, as part of a much more unified and a much more sophisticated understanding of what the problem is, and then the different ways into it. You were mentioning as well, and it links in with an ex-speaker, that new accord has that potential now, which is fantastic. It has this potential to reach to other countries. The Bangladesh Accord, originally triggered by the horrific Rana Plaza collapse, but since then, you know, hundreds of workers continually have died in absolutely preventable accidents, fires, building collapse, unsafe buildings, etc. So with this new international accord, there is there's new things for us to work together on, and to see the expansion of that. I'm happy that Ricardo Latorre can join us from the Fire Brigade Union. And Ricardo has been a firefighter for more than 17 years, and he was regional secretary, I think, at the FBU Eastern Region until last year, but he's now taken on a role as a national officer, and in that role is going to be and is more involved with sort of the international solidarity work. And FBU has a strong history actually with War on Want as well, in engaging in some of that international solidarity. which is certainly a key theme that's coming through today. So Ricardo, thank you very much for joining us. And maybe you can talk a little bit more to us around, health and safety as this sort of global workers issue, and cutting across the different sort of sectors as well, and why that is important in terms of a decent workplace and living a life of dignity at work as well. Thank you, Ricardo.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ruth. And yeah, thanks for having us here today. We're really pleased to be part of, what is an incredibly important discussion for the movement. And of course, on behalf of the Fire Brigade Union, bringing solidarity to the campaign and of course to the garment workers, all of Anton's members across the globe. And like you say, the FBU have been involved with War on Want and proud to have been involved with War on Want on particularly on the campaign for the safety of garment workers, particularly around the Accord, for a number of years now. And we're pleased to be able to carry on that work and as we go forward. And I think the reason the Fire Brigade Union are involved and have been involved is because when we look at the struggle of garment workers, when we listen to some of the conditions and the experiences that Tanzania has just laid out there that we heard from Anton earlier, I think we see that garment workers are among some of the most exploited workers in the world. And we also hear of how that disproportionately affects women workers and migrant workers. I think we have to understand that this exploitation, it isn't happening unknowingly, it isn't happening by accident. It's happening very much by design, because when we consider the conditions that we've heard today, the conditions that garment workers are being subjected to, what we're seeing is a very stark example of the outcomes of the system that we're all living under. There's the outcomes of the system that workers are having to operate under, and the outcomes of capitalism. And by that, what I mean is when the bosses, when the profiteers feel like they can't exploit workers enough at home, when they can't quite rip away enough safety and rights and conditions, to squeeze every single pick they can out of that worker, they will look elsewhere to do it. They will look abroad. They will look to places where they feel like they can get away with it more easily. And that is what we are seeing in the conditions that garment workers around the world are being subjected to. And often in that struggle, safety, health and safety is the first thing to be attacked, the first thing to be stripped away. But echoing Tanzi's message there, it isn't all bleak. Work organisation, collective activity absolutely can push back against those attacks and together improve the safety of workers. So it is clear as trade unions, why this is a discussion for us as trade unions everywhere, that we have to look at this as a class issue. We have to see this as an international problem and therefore address it with international solutions. So our class crosses borders. This exploitation, this struggle crosses borders, and therefore our organisation and our fight back against it also has to. And we can't simply, as workers, just allow NGOs alone to drive the change, just to have this conversation. Workers have to be at the forefront of it. Trade unions have to be at the forefront of it, because ultimately, when we look through history, it is workers that protect workers. It is working people that protect working people when we stand together. And every trade unionist and every worker in this meeting and involved with War on Want will understand that this isn't just a faraway problem. Exploitation of workers doesn't simply stop at our shores. Even here in one of the most developed nations in the world, as we've heard from Rob earlier, and across all sectors, bosses are finding ways every single day to punch down at us. And when we consider that in the context of what you, Ruth, explained at the beginning, and in the context of a global pandemic, household brands are still benefiting off the back of our workers. I mean, Tanzi mentioned there about what direction garment workers' wages are going compared to what direction brands' profits are going. And we are seeing super winners out of this pandemic, a pandemic that's killed millions of workers. And we're even seeing some of these bosses, some of these employers particularly take advantage of the fact that lockdown provisions are restricting union activity. They are restricting unions and workers' organisation and our ability to organise and fight back to defend and protect that health and safety. And we heard Anton earlier speak of some of the tactics being adopted by bosses in Sri Lanka, especially around not allowing workers to isolate, forcing workers back to work. And we start to see that, you know, not even a pandemic of this size is enough to stop the exploitation of workers, this ruthless drive for profit. In fact, it makes it worse. And that's where we start to see the similarities at home when I talk about this being a shared struggle for all workers. And I don't just mean in the direct comparisons, as like Rob mentioned there, to garment workers again here. I mean across all sectors. We look at my sector, arguably, you know, could we get to more different sectors than the fashion industry and the fire and rescue service? But those behaviours of employers we absolutely recognise, and the actions required of workers and trade unions in response, we absolutely recognise as well. So to put as simply as, we have seen fire bosses, chief fire officers work as hard as ever to try and navigate and to try and avoid firefighters having to isolate on the front line out there every single day throughout this pandemic. They don't fund the fire service properly, they don't employ enough staff, they are trying to avoid our isolation and therefore using our safety to cut budgets at every step of the way. When we talk about the Accord, you know, we can understand what an important role these agreements play, these collectively arrived at agreements play when it comes to the safety of workers. Again, we look at our industry throughout the pandemic, we reached a historic collective agreement on our pandemic work, which would allow firefighters to go above and beyond our normal role and take on extra activities to assist our communities through this crisis. Now, we moved thousands of dead bodies. This wasn't easy work. We drove thousands of ambulances. We delivered medicines and essential items to thousands of vulnerable people. All we asked for in return was the proper levels of PPE and the proper testing. But as we're seeing fashion employers and fashion brands push back on this Accord, we also saw that at home, where the Bosses Club, the fire chiefs under the organisation, the National Fire Chiefs Council, decided that safety of firefighters was too costly, it was too inconvenient, and they ripped that nationally agreed safety agreement up, not only putting firefighters, the workers at risk, but also the people that we are helping. We have no idea how many cases of COVID-19 we passed on as a result of fire chiefs removing those safety measures. So health and safety, and it's linked to collective bargaining, is the same struggle and a shared struggle for workers everywhere. So if we look back to the Accord for a minute, and we mentioned it there, you know, April 2013, the Rana Plaza, we saw 1,134 workers killed, many more injured, but 1,134 men and women went to work that day, and did not return home due to the conditions of the building that they worked in. And yet, I was looking at, I believe it was a Clean Clothes campaign Twitter account earlier, and I was watching a timeline of events. Yet, even though we know that, still every single day we are seeing garment workers all over the world in many countries risk their lives going to work in unsafe buildings as bosses continue to put profit before people, even though we know about events and incidents such as the Rana Plaza building. And if we look at the conditions in those factories, you could ask any FBU member, any professional firefighter or professional rescue worker about the enormous risk they present of a fire or an accident occurring. And when it does, that those workers do not stand a chance of getting to safety if those conditions persist. And if we know this, if we know that these conditions exist, then the brands that are profiting from the low cost of those conditions certainly do. Brands like Primark cannot be allowed to simply turn their head, wash their hands, and count their money back at home as their workers are risking their lives to make it. So they have to be held to account, and getting them to sign this Accord and agreements like this Accord absolutely are the start to that. And that's where collective action it comes in. And the FBU have been proud to actively campaign for the Bangladesh Accord on fire and building safety, which was established to stop events like Rana Plaza from happening again. And that Accord has helped thousands, it's made thousands of workplaces safer, and it's helped thousands of workers. But now it is replaced. We see how there are still brands, there are still corporations refusing to sign up to it. So as trade unionists, as workers, it is vital that we lend our voices, our efforts, and our campaigning to ensuring and applying the sort of pressure needed and the sort of joint work, as we heard Anton and Rob speaking about earlier there, to get these to sign that accord, but at the same time reaching out in solidarity to the workers in those factories. We can go back to our workplaces, we can go back to our branches and start these discussions, decide collectively about how do we reach out to our sister unions, how do we reach out to Anton's members, to the workers in these factories, to organise a sort of international solidarity we need. And education is also key here. We joint working with organisations like War on Want to share resources, to hold meetings, to raise awareness, to educate our members about the clothes on their back and the struggle of the workers who made it. Now, and of course, these discussions can't happen in isolation. When we're talking about international worker solidarity here, we have to be alive to the fact that, this system likes to protect itself, and there is a raft of anti-union laws that restrict workers from taking that sort of action, from sort of worker to worker solidarity action outside of their own workplace on wider political issues and campaigns that is needed here. It's made unlawful in the UK by our anti-trade union law. So how we show this action has to come hand in hand with discussions around how we act in spite of those laws, and ultimately how we rip those laws up and allow us to act in solidarity with workers everywhere on all issues. So, and I'll end on this, Chair, because I think I might have gone on a bit there, but collective agreements, the safety agreements, like you called, are vital. But as a movement and as organised workers, we also have to look at the longer term solutions here. So whilst the accord is vital, whilst it has helped and protected workers, and that will continue to help and protect workers, we have to realise here that capitalism and its ruthless drive for profit at any human cost is the root of this picture. And whether you're a garment worker in Sri Lanka, a brickie in Bulgaria, or a firefighter in Essex, so we're all under threat from that. It is a shared struggle amongst workers. So it is only the aim and achievement of a socialist system of society, of a fairer system of society, of a democratic system of society, to get that power back from capital to labour, away from bosses and back to workers, to give us a democratic voice, to give workers a democratic control in their workplaces, that ultimately is going to rid us of the sorts of exploitation that we've heard from Anton, Rob and Tansi today. So I'll end on that, Ruth, and only solidarity with the campaign, and absolute solidarity from the Fire Brigades Union with garment workers everywhere. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Ricardo, and I am not even going to attempt to say that any better, because that, I think, is a very powerful statement that you've just made around that unity and the root causes. That yes, there are steps, there are individual things we can do. There's the accord, we can put pressure on brands. Also War on Want is, you can go to our website, you'll see actions around the people's vaccine, around changing UK legislation, and as you said there's a lot of things that prevent that solidarity, because that is the powerful, that is how things will change. So thank you for that final comment, because I think you said it very well. Assad, who couldn't actually just join us in this panel, he left with me with a comment saying, we know change is coming from this pandemic. The question is, what will that change be? Will it be at the further expense of working people who are already paying a heavy price, or will that change actually be to deliver safe, just and a fair world that we've all been talking about? I think, yes, there has been, we've heard about the bleakness and the impact, and we've been hearing very clearly as well from all panel speakers that there is strength and there is possibility of change. We have to, first of all, envision that. We have to see it as being different and not accept that this is just how things are. I think on that note, we will be drawing to a close. It's been really great to hear from everyone. I'm sorry we didn't maybe have more time for some Q&A, but if anyone who's tuning in and joining us does want to know more about garment worker rights, etc., please do visit our website. And also, if you're in a trade union, you can affiliate with us and you can get more information from us regularly. I think all I will just say is to say, Anton, who has left us already, but to Tanzi and Ricardo, thank you very much, and to Rob also for joining us. And thank you to everyone that has joined us for this event. It will be recorded, so you can let others know that weren't able to attend today to also to watch this. Thank you very much, everyone.